Steve Hunter.
Hey.
It's so good to hear your voice, Steve.
Well, thank you. You too, Joe.
Thank you for sending me that wonderful new album.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad you like it. I assume you like it.
I love it. It's
Good.
It's one of the best discs I've heard all year, and I get a lot of records in the mail.
That's wonderful to hear that. Thank you.
I still call them records, Steve. Is that okay?
That's what I call them, too.
You know, they are. They're records.
Yeah.
Recordings.
I call them records or albums, you know.
Now, you know, vinyl's coming back. Your record might lend itself to a good vinyl pressing at some point.
Yes, we thought about that when I initially did my Kickstarter campaign. We thought about that. I looked into it. It was a little pricey, but it's still a possibility that somewhere down the line, I would love to have it pressed on vinyl. I really would.
Now, the title, how did you come up with the title? Because did you record it all in Manhattan?
No, it was all recorded in my studio. Part of it was recorded in, my studio is just like a home studio, but it's Pro Tools, you know, that kind of thing. I started it when I was living in Nashville, and then I finished it when we moved out here to Phoenix. So it was all recorded here. But the album, it's sort of like an old concept album where all the songs have something to do with New York City or my take on New York City and Manhattan and Brooklyn, things like that. So it's an old style concept album.
And I'm old school, so I like it.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. I always like concept albums because it was great to put the album on and listen from start to finish, and you get this sense of a continuity amongst all the songs. And the album seemed to have a flow that other albums don't have quite the same. I mean, it doesn't make them any worse or any better, but just I always kind of liked that. I always kind of liked an album that had a concept.
Now, you're still going around doing sessions and such, so do you fit the album in when I know you work with Alice Cooper on Welcome to My Nightmare.
Right, I did.
And so as you're developing this, do you just put stuff on the shelf, then go and do what you have to do, and then come back to it?
Well, yeah, actually, that's pretty much it. Yeah, you know, you'll have an idea. You might put an idea down, a progression maybe, or a little melody snippet and stuff. That's the wonderful thing about Pro Tools. It's once you've launched it, it's just sitting there waiting on you to hit record. So it does come in handy. And of course, even on my phone, you know, you can record stuff on your phone now. If you have an idea and you're out on the road or out running around or something, you can always throw an idea down. But yeah, that's what I do. I put little sketches away until I get freed up, and then I work on them later.
Interesting. So how did the concept come about? When did the initial idea happen?
Well, a friend of mine is a really great photographer, and she had taken some photographs of Manhattan on one of a beautiful spring day with a clear blue sky a couple of years ago. I think it was 2011, maybe even the early part of the year, the spring part of the year, obviously. And she took a couple of really beautiful photographs of Sunset Park and the skyscrapers, and they were just gorgeous photographs, and she posted them on Facebook. And one of them caught my eye, this beautiful sunset in Central Park. And when I looked at the photograph, I started getting ideas for a song. And as I worked on the song, I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. Maybe I should just write these songs based on photographs. That was my first inclination, was to do it that way. But then I started thinking, no, you know what I should do? I should write my take on New York City, because I've been in and out of Manhattan and New York many, many times over during my career. A lot of times I was there in the 70s. I was there, you know, several times in the year in the 70s doing overdubs and recording and stuff. So I have these memories of New York that might be a little bit different than everybody else's, and I might have a different take on the city itself as opposed to other people. So I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll do the sort of the bluesier side of Manhattan. Mostly Manhattan, although there is a song on there called the Brooklyn Shuffle. But it's mostly about Manhattan, because that's where I spent most of my time. And it just developed from Sunset and Central Park. The whole thing just developed from that song.
Now, on the Brooklyn Shuffle, which I found distinctly different from the other sounds because it's harder, it's probably the hardest track on the record.
Yes, yeah.
And you've got
What
John...
what I wanted to do was, I'd had all these songs that were fairly serious, you know, and very bluesy and moody, and I wanted to just lighten it up a little bit. And when I think of Brooklyn, I think of crossing the Brooklyn Bridge or whichever bridge you want to cross, and you go into Brooklyn, and Brooklyn just has this wonderful cruising kind of vibe to it. So I thought that's what I need to do. I need to do a shuffle. I need to do a shuffle so that, like when you're riding in a car or in a cab or something, you're going over to Brooklyn, this song could be playing in the background and it would make sense. So, but it had to be sort of a more up thing, and it had to be a little louder, and it had to be a little more in your face, and it had to be a little bit more fun. So I wanted to put one on there like that, and that's where the Brooklyn Shuffle came from.
Now, I did not know Johnny Depp plays guitar.
Oh yeah, he's a great guitar player. When he first came to Los Angeles, he came from Florida with a band. He had a band, and they did some shows around L.A. I used to remember looking at the L.A. Weekly, and I kept seeing this band called The Kids, and I didn't know who it was, and I never got to see him. But I heard years later that it was Johnny Depp's band. And they were trying to get a record deal and trying to get some things going, and nothing seemed to happen. And the next thing you know, Johnny Depp's an incredible actor. But he's still a great guitar player. And so I met him in London. I was out with Alice Cooper. We were 2011. We played a place called the 100 Club, which is an awesome place in London. It's a small club, but a lot of people play there all the time. And I met him. Alice Cooper was working with Johnny on the Dark Shadows movie.
Okay.
Invited him down to play with us, and that's how I met him. And that's when I got up the nerve to ask him if he'd like to play on my record, and he said, "Sure, I'd love to."
Now, I just saw Dark Shadows. It's on HBO now. So I just saw it the other day. That's pretty funny. Are you in the movie?
No. It's just Alice.
Okay.
And, I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know all of the particulars about it, but I used to watch the TV show all the time. It used to be one of my favorite TV shows.
Well, Alice is great, of course. Johnny Depp is great. What I don't like is Timothy Burton takes liberties, and it's almost a parody of Dark Shadows because it doesn't have that whole essence that Barnabas Collins brought to it. And, you know, the original Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, it was so regal back then.
Oh, yeah, Barnabas Collins was the coolest character. He was definitely the coolest.
Now, it's probably his final role because he died right after the movie came out.
Right, yeah.
Barnabas comes in at the party scene with Alice. And Johnny Depp has a great line, "Ugliest woman I've ever seen," for Alice Cooper.
Yeah, oh, great. That's terrific.
Yeah.
I'll have to try to see that. It sounds like my kind of movie.
Well, you know, if you have HBO or on demand, it's on that right now. But so, what did you do in London? If they were filming Dark Shadows in London?
Yeah, I think we had a couple of days off, and actually, I think we had several days off. If I remember right, that tour is a bit of a blur. We went around the world twice, and so it's a little blurry as to exactly what happened. But I think we had a few days off in Sweden, in Stockholm. And while we were off, Alice flew into London and worked on the film, and then we flew from Stockholm back to London to catch up with him to do the 100 Club.
So Alice would do a couple of like smaller clubs for the fun of it.
Well, yeah, but the 100 Club is kind of one of those nostalgic places like the Roxy or the Whiskey or something. You know that
Sure.
that you sort of just got to play. I mean, I've heard the Stones have played there many times. And it's a tiny club, but it's just there's something cool about it. You know, it's a really cool little club.
Now, when Bob Ezrin did the Mitch Ryder Detroit album,
Yeah.
that was Bob's first album, I believe.
Yeah, I believe it was. I think at the same time he was working with Jack Richardson on Alice's stuff. But the Detroit album, I think, was the first album that he produced solely himself. He was working with Jack Richardson. They were co-producing the Alice stuff. But the Detroit album, Bob produced that all himself.
Now, where were you before Detroit? How did they find you for the Detroit record?
Yeah, that's kind of a weird thing. I grew up in Decatur, Illinois, and 1970 I got out of the Army and went back to Decatur, of course, and I was in a couple of different bands in Decatur, and I finally got in this band called the Light Brigade. It was a pretty good band, and we were working around the central Illinois and sometimes up north, doing gigs and stuff and playing bars and stuff like that. And a friend of mine, a really good bass player named John Sauter, had gone to Detroit and actually had joined the Mitch Ryder's Detroit band. And he called me up one day and said, Steve, they're looking for guitar players up here, and they're having guys audition, so maybe you ought to come up and try out. It can't hurt. And so I thought, well, yeah, I should. I should go up there and check it out. I was a huge Mitch Ryder fan with the Detroit Wheels, so I thought this would be fun. So I drove all the way up there. It was like an 8-hour drive or something. And it was great because it was the first time I got to plug into a half-stacked Marshall. I'd seen Jimi Hendrix with him, but I never even saw one up close, and finally there was one, and I got to play through it. So I was pretty excited, and we just jammed on kind of Cream tunes and stuff since I didn't know any of the material. We just jammed on Creams and blues and some other rock and roll stuff, and had a great time. And I was just in love with the Marshall amp. It sounded so good. I ended up getting the gig, so now I'm a part of the band, and we start doing pre-production, like working on material, working on songs and stuff, and that's where I met Bob.
Wow. And that relationship has been a 40-year relationship, like?
Well, it's been even more than 40 years now, like 42 years. I think it was 71 when I moved up to Detroit.
Oh, so you moved right to Detroit.
I did. I moved from Decatur to Detroit, yeah.
Now,
once I joined the band, I went ahead and moved up there.
Now, I heard that it was recorded in, like, the Cream magazine offices or something?
No. It wasn't recorded there. We did rehearse there because the building was like this old condemned building, but it had this great big sort of meeting room. I guess they probably used it as a meeting room of some sort. It was huge. So we rehearsed there. We rehearsed in that big room at the Cream building. But it was recorded. Part of it was recorded in Chicago, and the other part was recorded in Toronto.
Oh man, I did not realize this.
Yep. We recorded about half of it in Chicago, and then we were out on the road at the time doing gigs. So when we came off the road, we'd go record. I think we recorded for 2 weeks in Chicago at RCA Studios in Chicago, and then we went to this studio called Manta in Toronto, which was an incredible studio. I think it's still there. It was a really cool studio. So we did about 2 weeks in Toronto at Manta, finishing it up.
So a big underground hit up here in Boston on WNTN in Newton was Rock and Roll, the Lou Reed song.
Right, yeah.
Who came up with that arrangement?
Heard about that. It was my arrangement. I came up with it. Geez, I don't know how I came up with it. I think in the back of my mind I was thinking, how would Leslie West play this song? Because I was a huge fan. And I think about a month before I started working on it, I had gone to see Mountain at the Easttown Theater in Detroit. And they were just phenomenal. It was one of the most phenomenal rock and roll bands I had ever seen. And Leslie West was just a flawless player. So I was a huge fan. So I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I might have been thinking, I wonder how Mountain would do this tune. And this arrangement started coming out. So it was sort of a combination of Mountain and maybe Cream and a little bit of Hendrix. It's all my favorites, influenced how that arrangement came out.
And you do realize that Joan Jett and the Blackhearts and Blue Swede covered your arrangement.
Yes, that's what I'd heard, although I've never heard those arrangements, strangely enough. I did hear that there were a couple of more versions out, then I never got to hear them. And I thought, well, that's funny. I wonder how come they didn't go back and do Lou's version or something. It caught me off guard, but I thought it was very cool. Very cool that happened.
Well, Kim Fowley discovered the Runaways, and I can see Kim, who was big into Cream magazine and rock scene.
Yeah.
And understanding the brilliance of your arrangement, I can understand Kim going with the Runaways. Blue Swede, now that's an oddity.
Yeah, I never would have thought that. It was a cool band, but I never would have thought they'd have even been interested in that. It's cool that they were, though. It's very cool.
There was their third single. They actually did it on the Midnight Special. So if you go into YouTube, I think you can hear their version.
Oh, I got to check that out. I don't think I've ever heard it. That'd be awesome. I'll check that out. Thank you for that.
Being a fan of yours, I of course picked up 45s of this stuff and have them in the cellar somewhere, you know, because it was just it was interesting following the whole progression, the genesis of this, and then how it all expanded. You know, and then of course after Detroit. Well, tell me a little bit more about Detroit. How long did that last?
Well, I wasn't really there. I don't even think I was there for a full year. We were having a lot of trouble getting any help from the label, you know, to help us promote the album and maybe help get us some gigs and get us on the radio and things like that. We were just having a lot of trouble with the label helping us out, which, you know, I think a lot of that sort of happened in those days. The music business was really crazy back then. I mean, it still is, but it was really didn't know what to do a lot of times, you know. So we were really out there busting our butts, you know, trying to do as many shows as we do all over the country and in Canada and everything. But we just couldn't get enough backing from the label, and the band just sort of very slowly, gently fell apart.
Well, Paramount
and
Records. I'm sorry?
I moved back to Decatur and waited on the next thing to happen. You know, I didn't know what I was going to do after that.
You know, Paramount Records, like 20th Century, they had worked hard at making a label, but they were basically film companies, I guess.
Yeah, and I didn't quite understand that because I thought Paramount would understand what needs to be done to make a record. It's the same thing you do for a movie. It's just it's not as much money. It's a lot cheaper to promote an album than it is a film. But I didn't quite understand why they didn't get it, except maybe it was just they didn't get the right people or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but one would think because they have a film company, put one or two of the songs in a movie.
Well, you'd think, yeah.
You know, and put,
think?
you know.
I don't know. I never understood all that. Of course, I was pretty naive then, and I didn't really know that much about the business. I just, it's what I could pick up from the peripheral that the album just wasn't being promoted as well as it could have been.
Now, you had colleagues on Paramount Records you might not have ever met called Milkwood. Did you ever hear of them?
No, I've never heard of them.
So Milkwood had an album out on Paramount like in '72, and that was Rick Otkasik, Ben Orzechowski, and Greg Hawkes of The Cars.
Wow, no kidding. I didn't know that.
The Cars' very first album was on Paramount under the name Milkwood. I have a copy.
Wow.
I should try to make you a CD of it so you can hear your label mates.
Yeah, that'd be. I didn't know they were there. I mean, that's amazing. That's an amazing thing to hear. I didn't know that.
Well, they're Boston guys basically, but Ben was a friend of mine. I was his personal videographer. I don't know if you know, we lost Ben a few years back.
Yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah.
But in 1998, he had me videotaping his shows because his guitar player was an old dear friend of mine, John Kalishis. So it was very tragic to lose Ben, but I guess he was from Ohio, and I don't know where Rick Ocasek was from, but Greg Hawkes lives here in the Boston area, who was working with Martin Mull. So the keyboard player from The Cars was actually some kind of a string instrument player for Martin Mull.
Wow, that's amazing. It's a weird world, isn't it?
It is. I thought you'd dig some of that history, you know?
Oh, I love that stuff, yeah. I hear stories like that all the time, too, especially in the music business.
So around this time, Lou Reed had a band, a very, very good garage band called the Tots.
Yep.
I really liked them. And then my friend Moogie Klingman replaced the Tots. And Moogie just passed away, but he was a keyboard player with, he worked with Bette Midler and Utopia. He founded the band Utopia with Todd Rundgren.
Todd Rundgren, right.
So Moogie Klingman finished the tour when Lou got tired of the Tots.
Yeah.
And then the Rock and Roll Animal Band. Then you guys started making the tour happen for the Berlin album.
Right, that's right.
So you were in Decatur, and what happened? Did Bob call you up?
Yeah, literally, that's what happened. I was back in Decatur and wondering what the hell I'm going to do now because Detroit had broken up, and I really didn't have a clue what was going to happen next. And then one day the phone rang, and Bob said, "How'd you go to London?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, I'd love to go. I've never been to London." He said, "Well, we're going to go to London, and we're going to work on the Lou Reed album." He said, "But first, we're going to fly to Toronto. I'm going to show you some of the songs, give you an idea of what we're going to be doing." And Ainsley Dunbar is going to fly with us, and we're all going to fly over to London. And next thing I know, I'm on an airplane on my way to London.